Dr. Traci Mann.
Thank you.
Watch your step.
I know. My gosh, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to have sort of overcome the first hurdle, which was to not fall down that step, which is conveniently placed there just to kill all speakers. Thank you so much for having me to this really wonderful event. I don't know of anything like it, and it's fantastic, and I'm really honored to be here. My plan, is everything showing? It is. My plan today is to talk to you about the science of diet failure. And I love to do that while you're eating. I'm thrilled. Seriously, you think I'm kidding, but I actually am very serious, as you will see soon. I am very pro-eating, extremely pro-eating. Now, before jumping right in and talking about why diets fail, I feel that I should at least give you a little evidence that they fail. So to do that, what we have to really figure out first is what would count as a failure, what would count as a success in a diet. And I personally think that we should judge diets based on what dieters themselves want, right? And dieters want, you guys know what dieters want. Dieters want to lose a lot of weight and keep it off a long time, if not forever. If that's how we're going to define diet success, then diets fail. Diets fail on both of these points. A long time ago, my lab sat down and hunted through the medical literature and found every diet study we could find. And we reviewed 60 years of research on diets. And what we found is that people lose only about 10% of their starting weight on most diets. And then by about 3 years after starting the diet, they've gained back all but about 2 of those pounds. Okay, most dieters would not think that that is a success. Now, our government, on the other hand, does think that's a success. The Institute of Medicine has actually defined diet success as losing just 5% of your starting weight and keeping it off a year. 5% of your starting weight. If you weigh 200 pounds, 5% of that is 10 pounds. I don't think any dieters would call that a success. And then when they say to keep it off for a year, that really means a year from when you started the diet. So it takes a good bit of that time just to take it off. So really, their standard for diet success is oddly low. So that's the government. Now, in addition to that, a diet company, the CEO of a commercial diet company, would also consider that successful. Okay, and they would think that that's successful because their business depends on repeat customers. And they admit this flat out. The former CFO of Weight Watchers actually said in an interview, the people who regain the weight, that's where our business comes from. That's their business model. It's a fantastic business model because when people lose weight on their diet, they tend to give the credit to the diet itself, to the company, to the diet. But when they regain the weight, they blame themselves. Something is wrong with that. Now, only a small minority of dieters, about 5%, take off a lot of weight and keep it off a long time. Okay, so that means that there are a lot of dieters out there who have regained the weight that they lost and who are blaming themselves. Okay, but they shouldn't blame themselves. And what I want to do today is tell you exactly why they shouldn't blame themselves. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that it's not about willpower. Willpower is something my lab has focused on for over 20 years now. And in those 20 years, I've had many, many opportunities to tell people what I do. Comes up all the time, of course. And whenever I tell people that I run an eating lab and do research on the self-control of eating, they always say the same thing. Always. Okay? Not that. Nope, not that. Never. Never, not one person has ever said that to me. In all these years, in 20 years, not a single person. Okay, do these people exist? I'm sure there's some, because there's everything, but it's quite rare. What everyone actually says to me is basically the opposite of that, right? They say, self-control of eating, oh man, I need some of that. That's what I struggle with. Wow, you study the exact thing I struggle with. They all say it as if they have this unique struggle that most other people don't have. All these people thinking they're sort of so unusual, right, in their ability to basically resist foods in a reliable way, they're not alone. Okay, they're not unique. They're pretty much everybody. Okay, everybody struggles with this. Thin people, obese people, everybody in between. And if everybody struggles with it, it's really hard to see how it can possibly be the crucial factor that explains who's going to end up thin and who's going to end up obese. Now, sure enough, there's all kinds of scientific evidence which shows that willpower plays a much smaller role in people's weight than everybody seems to think. And I'm going to tell you about some of that. But first, before I do, let's just think through a situation in which you have to use self-control for eating, just to give you, I think, a sense of why it probably doesn't matter very much. Okay, so suppose you're in a meeting, and one of your coworkers, very lovely thing to do, brings in a box of donuts. Okay, so there's these donuts on the table. Here's your meeting, and somebody brings in the donuts. Now, you're trying to resist having one. Okay, now this takes multiple acts of self-control. It's not just one single, I'm not going to take it, it's done, you've controlled yourself, right? It's not that simple. You have to resist it now, you have to resist it 2 minutes from now, and you have to resist it basically every time you look up and notice it. If you're hungry, you're going to look up and notice it often. Okay, in fact, there's actually research evidence showing that it will distract you from what you're trying to do in your meeting, which is why I have it covering up the whiteboard, because that's pretty much what happens, right? Suddenly, that's the only thing. I tried to make it pulse, but there wasn't like an option for that, but that's how I envision it. Anyway, so let's say now you've resisted it 19 times because you have unbelievably good self-control, right? So 19 times that you look up and notice it, you resist it. Okay, but then you get distracted. Have a 2-second moment of weakness, and what happens? You take a donut, and then you go ahead and eat it. Okay, so if that happens, right, and you've shown great self-control 19 out of 20 times, doesn't matter. You get no credit for all that self-control you just showed. You get nothing. You have nothing to show for it, right? You may as well have had bad self-control for all the good your very impressive self-control did for you. You ate the donut, so did your coworker, who you know has no self-control and ate it on the 3rd time they noticed it. Okay, so with self-control of eating, and uniquely with eating and a few other things, these momentary lapses of self-control, they basically erase previous successes. Okay, they essentially wipe out the differences between people, except maybe on the extremes of the distribution. Now, if you think about it, that's not really true with other behaviors. Okay, so consider academic achievement. I teach college students, and the problem that they seem to have, especially these days, when they're trying to study for a test, is that they keep getting distracted by everything else on their computer, right? So if you control yourself well for most of the time that you're studying, but then have a lapse here or there, you can still do well, right? The couple moments that you stop studying, you start looking at YouTube videos, whatever it is, maybe that sort of costs you a few minutes of study time, but what it doesn't do is erase all the studying you've done up until that point. Okay, that studying is still in the bank, right? But with eating, it's not, and that's the trouble with eating. Eating is particularly unforgiving of lapses in self-control. Not only that, but lapses in self-control are really hard to avoid when it comes to eating. As you all know, we have way too many opportunities to eat, right? We have too many temptations. They're all around us all the time. And then these lapses of self-control can happen really quickly. So there's always enough time to have a lapse in self-control. You don't need more than a moment for that to happen. So if willpower was going to prevent this, it would have to be incredibly strong. It would have to be almost flawless to handle that, but it's actually the opposite. It's really fragile. It's incredibly easy to disrupt. So for years, maybe for 10 years, my lab did studies where we put milkshakes in front of dieters, and then we looked at what sorts of conditions would, it sounds mean, but it wasn't. Well, maybe it was, I don't know. It was not, okay, it was a little mean. But anyway, we put milkshakes in front of dieters, and we looked at what helped them to resist the milkshake and what messed them up. And I'm going to summarize 10 years of my life for you by saying that basically what we found is that everything messed them up and nothing helped. That's so 10 years. So that's part of the problem with willpower. Another problem with willpower is that despite what you see on the cover of women's magazines, there's no evidence at all that people can grow it, if that's what they even mean when they say harness your willpower. I'm not even sure what that means, but there's no evidence at all that people can grow their willpower. There's been lots of research where people have tried to come up with ways for people to get better at willpower. No success ever, as far as I can see. Okay, so I promised some evidence that willpower doesn't matter so much for weight. So here's some evidence. I'm going to show you a test that they use, but we're not going to do the test. I'm going to tell you about a test they use in willpower research to see if people's self-control or willpower is good or bad. And it's called the marshmallow test. It's been in the news some, so perhaps you've heard of it. So in this test, what they do is they take a 4-year-old kid and they leave him alone with one marshmallow, and they say, if you can resist this marshmallow, if you can, not eat this marshmallow right now, you can have 2 marshmallows later. Okay, so that's the situation. Then they leave the kid alone, and they just see how long they can resist it. And that's the test. Okay, and the number of seconds that they can resist it turns out to be a good measure of your willpower ability. Now, what they do in this research line, it's actually really amazing research. They find these kids 10, 20, even 30 years later, they've done this, and they measure all kinds of things about how these kids have turned out. And what they find is that the number of seconds you can resist a marshmallow when you're 4 predicts all kinds of adult outcomes. Okay, it predicts things, including their weight, and including things like how well they do on the SAT. Okay, things like that, and lots of other things. I'm going to focus on those. Now, it seems like what I would assume most people would guess is that the longer you can resist a marshmallow, the lower your weight, and the better that it would be really good at predicting people's weight, and maybe not so good at predicting how people do on the SATs. But in fact, it's just the opposite. Willpower is 8 times better at predicting your SAT score than your weight. Okay, and to say that in sort of the science sort of fancy way, what I'm saying is that willpower explains about 32% of the variation between people in their SAT score, but only 4% of the variation between people in their weight. Okay, now, I feel like I'm getting just a little too complicated here, so forget all that, and instead I'm going to give you a simple way to remember just how unimportant self-control is when it comes to weight loss. Okay, it's simple but slightly obnoxious, I'm not going to lie. Okay, so here's how you know that self-control doesn't matter all that much. Okay, now consider someone, so remember I said about 5% of dieters take off all this weight and keep it off a long time? Now consider somebody who we all know who's in that small minority of very successful dieters. Okay, someone who's in that small minority is Bill Clinton. And I'm just going to whisper this part because it's obnoxious, but he's not someone that most people describe as having impressive self-control. Okay? I just whispered it. I didn't say it out loud. I'm a fan. I like him. Voted for him, like him. But, I mean, come on, right? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Self-control is only very slightly related to weight and weight loss, just this tiny amount that you can see in this graph here. Okay, so the bottom line is if you've struggled to take weight off or struggled to keep it off after losing it, it is not because you have worse self-control. Okay, it's not because you have a weaker will than everyone else. All right, so what is it because of? Well, before I answer that, just think in your head, or let me ask you this. Do any of you know someone who can just eat whatever they want, but then they don't get fat? Right? And they don't even exercise, right? Okay, let it be on the record that everyone is agreeing that they know such a person. Right, we all know this kind of person. In fact, some of you might even be this person. And my suggestion, my recommendation for those of you who are this kind of person, just a little pointer for you, is just to keep it to yourself. Nobody wants to know. Okay, we know you exist. We all do. Okay, so that exists. Now, do you know what else exists? If you think about it, these people exist too, you just don't know it. Obese people who don't eat that much but are still obese. Now, for the longest time, obesity researchers just flat out denied that these kinds of people existed. They would do studies where they had people record everything they ate for days or weeks, and what they'd find in their data is obese people who were not consuming that many calories. Okay, sometimes even fewer calories than the thin people in their samples. Now, obesity researchers, what they concluded when they were faced with this kind of data, really horribly, what they concluded is that the obese people were lying. It's really, really harsh, really scientifically dubious, and extremely, extremely harsh. Now, in fact, the lie is what we've all been taught as the gospel. Okay, the lie is that your weight is based only on what you eat and how much you exercise. Okay, if that were true, then we just could not have thin people who eat so much and burn so little without getting fat. Right? And we couldn't have fat people who eat so little without getting thin. It would just simply not be possible. But we do have these people, and we have these people because your weight is influenced by so much more than the calories that come in and the calories that go out. So this past summer, I was at an academic meeting where the topic was obesity and predictors of obesity, and somebody put up this little diagram showing all the different things that influence obesity. Just a simple little diagram. Okay, I couldn't even make it big enough for you to read all those gazillion nodes on there. Even this big blow-up of it is ridiculous. Okay, luckily the next diagram they put up was the simple one. Here's the simple one. Okay, still crazy and not simple, and don't even read it, it's just ridiculous. The only thing you need to know from this is that a lot of the functions here, and on the previous one, are genetically based. Okay, not all of them, but a lot of them. And we know a lot about the genetics of obesity. A lot of this comes from studies of people who were adopted or from studies of twins. So consider the adoption studies. I find them very, very persuasive. What you can do is you can compare the weight of kids who are adopted to the weight of their birth parents, okay, with whom they share lots of genes. Right? And you can compare their weight to their adoptive parents, with whom they don't share genes, but who have set their entire eating environment from day one on. And what you find in those studies is that, let's see, is this working? Yes. What you find in those studies is that their adult weight is much, much, much closer to their birth parents than their adopted parents. Okay, so what that shows is their genes are playing a more important role in their ultimate weight than their environment. Okay, so that's an adoption type of study. We also know a lot from studies of twins. I'm not going to go over twin studies. I just want to show you some twins. These are identical twins, monozygotic twins. They share 100% of their genes. Okay, in most of these pairs, but not all, because it's never all, but in most of these pairs, their weight is pretty nearly identical to each other. Okay, but if you look at some fraternal twins, now these are dizygotic twins, they share 50% of their genes with each other. Okay, their weights not nearly as similar to each other as the identical twins, but certainly still more similar to each other than pairs of people who don't share any genes, which I don't have a picture of, because that would just be pictures of any two people. So it's like I could make a slide of like random pairs of people, but that just seems silly. Okay, so this is basically saying that genes matter a lot, and the thinking is that genes predict about 70% of people's adult weight. Okay. So when you say something's genetic, people get this idea that there's just one gene, right? And that the thing is just simply coded on this single gene. So with weight, people think there's just one gene that says you will weigh this amount as a full-grown adult, right? But so, of course, that's way oversimplified. There's over 100 different genes that are linked to obesity. I think over 200 even now. And every year they're finding more and more. So what kinds of things are coded on our genes that can influence our weight? Well, let me show you some. Now, to give one category of things, let's take hormones. Okay, the relative levels and responsiveness of dozens of different hormones, okay, including the hormones of the gastrointestinal system known as the gut hormones, the hormones that determine how hungry and how full you feel. Okay, so one of those hormones determines how much you need to eat to feel full. Another one determines how long you will stay hungry. different genes get at each of those. So some people, you can imagine, might feel full from eating one sandwich. Okay, they eat one sandwich and their satiety hormone kicks in. But maybe there's another person of the same size who needs to eat 3 sandwiches before that hormone kicks in. Okay, now that's genetically determined. If one sandwich fills you up, you're much less likely to overeat. And it's because of these genetically determined hormone differences. What are you supposed to do if you need 3 sandwiches to fill you up? What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to only eat one and live hungry all the time? I mean, just think about it, or think about it later. If you think it's fair or appropriate for us as a society to expect some people to never feel full. Okay, to never feel full, to always feel hungry, just so that they can achieve a certain weight. Okay, I'm not sure I'm okay with that. All right, so that's one thing hormones influence. Another thing hormones influence is which foods you like and want. Okay, they influence how palatable you find different foods. Now, if you've ever been pregnant, you've experienced this. When I was pregnant, I wanted apples, just constantly apples. It's all I wanted. I don't usually want apples. I don't usually care about apples at all. But when pregnant, that's all I wanted. I had no interest in the things I normally like ice cream or cookies. And it's not because I was actively trying not to want those things. I was actually doing the opposite. I was deciding that I could have anything I wanted the entire time. But still, I didn't want them. All I wanted was apples and other crunchy, healthy things. Okay, clearly, hormones have something to do with that, right? So for some people, it's going to be much easier to resist tempting food. It's going to be much easier for some people to resist ice cream than it is for other people. But it won't be because of their brilliant self-control, although they might say it is. But it won't be. It won't be because of their self-control. It's because they just aren't as tempted by it. Okay, it doesn't seem as appealing to them. It doesn't count as self-control if you don't actually want the thing. Right? That is not self-control. Okay, now you also know people like this, right? With these annoying preferences. You know, you'll be eating in a restaurant with them, it'll be dessert time, and they'll say, I don't really care for chocolate mousse. You know, you've eaten with people like this, so annoying. So annoying. So those are hormonal differences. Now there's also a bunch of neurological differences. People differ in their brain's responsiveness to the sight of food. Okay, so some people get a big reward response, a big rush of dopamine when they see certain foods. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that you may have heard of. It's associated with reward and pleasure. You get a dopamine rush, or addicts get a dopamine rush when they see the drugs they're addicted to. Okay, so it's a powerful reward. And some people get a big reward response when they see certain foods, and other people don't. Okay, so the bigger this reward response, the more pleasing you find it to think about and eat that food, the more you crave it, and the harder it's going to be to resist it. Okay, so there's a lot of different neurological functions that influence people's susceptibility to obesity. The reward response, that's just one of them. Okay, so neurological responses have a genetic basis. And then, of course, as everyone I think knows, your metabolism is genetically based. And I think people have a basic intuition about this. Your metabolism determines how efficiently you use the calories that come in and how many calories you burn just doing the job of running your body. Okay, so some people will burn up more of the calories from this donut just while sitting there doing nothing than other people. Okay, and this is how you can have thin people who eat a lot and fat people who don't. Okay, you can put people on the exact same diet and completely different things will happen to their weight. Okay, so I'm going to show you a graph. I'm going to show you a few graphs. Are you guys cool with graphs? Okay, I am so into graphs. I'd rather see a graph than a picture, but that's, well, I don't need to tell you my embarrassing stories. This is a graph of what happened to 29 different people who were put on the very same low-calorie diet for 10 weeks. Each bar in this graph is a different person. Okay, so what you can see is sort of from the left, the bars on the left, those are some people who lost a lot of weight. It's a graph of how much their weight changed. So going down is losing weight. Some lost a lot, some toward the middle lost a little. And as you get to the right, you see some people even gained weight. Okay, now when you see graphs like this, people say, well, I bet some of those people lied. People are always accusing subjects of lying. I bet some of those people lied and ate more than they were supposed to. Okay, now it's possible. So they have studies where they make sure that that's not possible by having the dieters actually come and live in the weight loss clinic where they're doing the study, or they live in the hospital or whatever it is, and then all of the food that they eat is brought to them and they have no access to anything else. Even when they do that, you still get this wide variation in what happens. Some people lose a lot, some lose a little, and some don't lose any. Now, the same kind of thing happens in studies where they do kind of the reverse. They have people overeat the same amount. So in one of those studies, no one seems to want to be in this study, but actually, yeah, people were in this study. Researchers basically figured out the amount of calories that each of the participants needed to eat to stay at their same weight. And then they overfed each of them 1,000 more calories than that per day for 100 days. Okay, and they didn't allow them to exercise. Show of hands, who's in? Nobody, okay. Nobody's in. Each bar in this graph is a different person from that study. And what you can see again is this huge variation in how much weight people gained. So some gained as many as 30 pounds, but others as little as 10. Okay, all the same. And the same thing is true. I'm not going to really talk about exercise much, although maybe in the Q&A. But the same is true for exercise also. So here's data from a study where everybody did the same exact exercise, same intensity, for 12 weeks, and they did it in the researcher's clinic, so we know they did it, we know what they ate. And some people lost a lot of weight, some lost a little, and some gained. Okay, the two bars are because one of the colors is weight, the other is fat mass. Same deal. Okay, so crucial first point here is that your weight is based on a lot more than calories in, calories out, and these genetically based factors affect so many different aspects of it, right? Including how tempting a food looks to you, how rewarding that food is to you, how much you crave it, how hungry you feel after eating it, right? And the rate at which you burn up the calories from it. Now, if you're a thin person, you're probably on what I think our society would call the lucky side with a lot of these factors, right? The side that makes it really easy to remain thin. And if you're an obese person, odds are that you're on the side that makes it hard. Okay, now it seems to me crazy to blame someone for their fatness or be impressed by their thinness, given that. Okay, so that's point one. Now point two here is where things really get frustrating. Okay, because regardless of where you start out on these genetic differences here, there's one thing that reliably messes them all up for everybody, okay, and that's dieting. Okay, dieting. So if you restrict your eating for a while, if you lose some weight, if your body detects this sense of deprivation, right, that not enough calories are coming in, then all of these biological factors change for the worse. Okay, they change in the way that undermines your efforts to keep the weight off. And this is why diets don't work in the long run for the large majority of people. Okay, so after losing weight, your metabolism changes, okay, so that you run your body on fewer calories than before, which leaves more left over, unused, to store as fat. That's not what you want to do when you're trying to lose weight. So if you eat the same amount of calories you were eating in the beginning of your diet when you lost weight, after a while, you're going to stop losing weight. Okay, and you might even start to gain weight. What will people say? They'll say that you had no self-control, right? They'll say that you couldn't hack it, that you weren't strong enough, even though you're eating so little, certainly less than them, I'm thinking. Okay, so that's one part. After losing weight, your hormone levels change. So you're more likely to feel hungry, and you need to eat more to feel full. The levels of those different hormones I mentioned before alter. So again, if you eat the same amount of calories you ate to lose weight, you'll feel even hungrier than you felt before. You probably felt hungry even then when you were losing the weight, but now you're going to feel even hungrier, and there's no way around that. To keep weight off, you have to feel hungry all the time, and you will. Okay, and then after losing weight, your brain changes in ways that make food more tempting. You become preoccupied with food. You can see this. There's lots of research showing this. This is a pretty easy one to study, but the sort of evidence for this that I find most interesting to look at comes from journals left by explorers who starved to death. Now, explorers, they're really interesting in this area because they're extremely diligent about writing in their journals. They tend to write up until the last few days they're alive, if not even the last day that they're alive. And when they're starving to death, they talk about food a lot. Okay, they talk about dreaming about food. This is, that is Robert Falcon Scott. He's a polar explorer. Polar explorers, ooh, that's a tough job. Don't recommend that. He is from England, and he's extremely famous there, even though he came in second. He was the second guy to the South Pole. When you're an explorer, coming in second that's not like coming in second in the Olympics. Coming in second is you didn't do it. You didn't discover it, right? It's the other guy. So not good to come in second. And he was beaten just by 28 days. It's really a tragic story. And not only that, but he starved to death on the way back, along with his entire crew. Is that what it's called? The explorer crew. Now, at the University of Cambridge, they have an entire museum in honor of this guy. And I was there on sabbatical a couple years ago, so I got to spend a little time in there, and I looked through his journals and his writing. Oh, yeah, and these heartbreaking letters he wrote to everyone and left. Anyway, he, not in those letters, but in his journals, he talked about food a lot. A lot of food comments, daydreams about food, mentions of dreaming about food. Okay, now you don't need to be starving to death for this to happen. Okay, these neurological changes, they happen when you lose weight. Even some research has shown they start happening even after losing just 2 pounds. And they happen if you're depriving yourself of food. Okay, now what's going to happen? You tend to think about it constantly, right? You're more likely to notice food that's in front of you. And eating it will, again, give you this stronger reward response. Okay, and this is not ideal if you're trying to keep dieting. And I'm pretty sure every dieter will quickly agree that that is what they experience, this sudden preoccupation with thoughts of food. Okay, so point 2 is that dieting leads to biological changes that make it incredibly difficult to keep weight off. Just that small minority of people manage to do it, and to do it, they have to go about their lives eating very, very little, always feeling hungry, and constantly thinking about food, right? Basically fighting against all these different things in these diagrams. Okay, so knowing this makes me just so angry when people blame dieters for regaining weight they lost. I simply cannot stand it anymore, and this was the motivating factor behind why I wrote this book on this topic. Okay, I just can't stand it, and the comment that makes me want to scream more than any other is when people say, and people say this all the time, they say, well, that all may be true, but they're still the one holding the fork. They're still the one shoveling it in. I just hate when people say that. Okay, I will grant them that they are holding the fork, and that's it, right? They're holding this fork in a completely different physiological and psychological context than someone who hasn't been dieting, right? They're holding it in a context, in a situation in which their biology has turned against them. Okay, and to succeed, again, they have to battle all of these things. So if you've been dieting, you're holding your fork in a context in which your hormones are preventing you from feeling full, causing you to feel extremely hungry, right? You're holding the fork in the context in which your brain is more likely to notice foods, pays extreme attention when there are foods present, and can't easily be shaken from those thoughts. Okay, so you're holding the fork in a physiological situation in which your brain is responding to food with a more powerful hit of reward, right, with extra pleasure and extra reinforcement. So yes, again, I grant them, they are holding the fork, okay, but it's this physical situation, right, this physiological battle that is making them so likely to pick it up. And it's a completely different context than someone who isn't dieting. Okay, completely different. Okay, so as I think you can tell, I do not recommend dieting. I do not think people's goal should be to lose a lot of weight. Okay, fair enough. What should be the goal then? Well, here's what I think should be the goal. I think the goal should be to aim for what I'm going to call your leanest livable weight. Okay, this is the lowest weight you can be without setting off all those biological changes that dieting causes, right? Those changes happen when you try to live below basically what's called your set weight range. This is a weight that your body basically tries to defend. Okay, and so when you try to live below that range, all these bad things happen. So don't try to, don't live there. Live within your set weight range, but it's a big range, so what I recommend is that you aim to live at the low end of that range. Okay, now that might not be as low as your usual diet daydream. Okay, that might not be as low as your typical goal. Okay, but I still suggest that this is a good goal, that this is a goal that's achievable. Okay, it's a weight you can maintain, you can get to it without it taking over your life, and you can be healthy at this weight. Okay, now we need something between this damaging restrictive dieting that everybody recommends and just letting it all go, which sort of another group of people recommends. And this is what I believe to be is in the sensible middle between all that. So in recent years, after giving up on willpower, I've been researching strategies for healthy eating that don't involve dieting and that don't depend on willpower. And instead, these strategies are aimed at just making sure you never need willpower. So what I'm going to do for the next 5-6 minutes, maybe a teeny bit more, is tell you about a couple simple strategies. Okay, and if you want more, then that's why I put a picture of the book there, because there are 12 strategies in there. I can't tell you 12 strategies right here, but I'll tell you 2, maybe 3. Okay, so some of the strategies are ways to put obstacles between yourself and tempting food. And these strategies work great because we, and I include myself, we tend to be a little bit lazy. Okay, people are lazy. So obstacles stop us or slow us down. Okay, so we can take advantage of this. So some colleagues of mine in the Netherlands, they did this cute study where they showed that if there's a bowl of M&Ms across the room from where you're sitting, okay, you won't eat as many as if the bowl's right there at your table. Okay, but the thing is, that's a big obstacle. You have to stop what you're doing, you have to get up, you have to walk 5 feet across the room, you got to get the M&Ms. It turns out you don't need a big obstacle to stop you. A tiny obstacle will do the job. Okay, so they also tested a situation where instead of the bowl of M&Ms being across the room or right there by your hand, they put it on the table so that you have to straighten your arm to get it. Okay, you actually have to straighten your arm to reach. Seriously, it's 2 feet. It's 2 feet from you. Okay, some of you don't even have to straighten your arm fully. I think I maybe do. Okay, you don't even really need to lean. Okay, so this I think is the smallest possible obstacle one could put. But still, it makes a huge difference. It makes as much a difference as if it's clear across the room. Okay, does this keep you from eating any M&Ms at all? Well, no. Okay, but it helps you to eat less, helps you to eat fewer M&Ms, and that, I believe, should be the goal. Okay, eating less, but not necessarily none. Okay, because you need to enjoy your life, right? You need to enjoy your life. Food is enjoyable. Food is pleasing. So I don't ever recommend not eating a certain thing. I don't ever recommend forbidding yourself from eating a certain food. And actually, we did studies on this years ago, God, years and years ago, where we had subjects list a food that they felt kind of neutrally about, so that they didn't love and didn't hate, and we forbade them from eating it for 3 weeks. And what happened is it made them think about it constantly and want it constantly. Okay, and that's a food they don't really care about, right? Imagine if it was something you love. Okay, forbidding yourself from eating something is a recipe for disaster. Okay, so that's one kind of strategy. Now, another kind of strategy would be to flip that around on its side, really, to help you eat more healthy foods by removing obstacles that come between you and them. Okay, so there's a lot of obstacles to eating vegetables. In particular, they're high maintenance. You know, you have to clean them and cut them and cook them, and there's just too much to do, and they're confusing. It's not totally obvious what to do with each one. So, I mean, some of them are not confusing. I get a carrot, but some of them are trickier to, what do you do with beets? So that was a bad example. I know what to do with, what do you do with a rutabaga? There's a question. Okay, but that's not the obstacle I'm talking about, although I do talk about that obstacle elsewhere. The obstacle, I think a more important obstacle to eating vegetables is this one. Okay, vegetables lose. Basically, for most people, especially kids, right, vegetables they're just not as yummy as everything else. They're not as yummy as other foods, so they tend to lose to other foods when they're on your plate, right? When they're all on your plate, in this case, the peas are going to lose out to the fries or the other thing. I don't know what it is. Is it shrimp? Is it fried shrimp? Like they even fried the tail part? Okay. I don't know how that works. Anyway, they lose. Vegetables almost always lose when put in head-to-head competition. So we decided we needed a strategy where we could put a vegetable in a competition that it actually could win. So here is a competition that I think a vegetable has a prayer of winning. Okay, vegetable versus nothing. This is true. This is your vegetable's best bet, right? Dude, I dare you to disagree. This strategy is what I call get alone with a vegetable. And this is the way you need to do things. Or we call it veggies first. Couldn't be easier, okay? Just eat the vegetable before you put any other food on your plate or even have it on your table. Okay, the only food around you needs to be just your vegetable. Okay, if all you have is a vegetable and you're hungry, you will eat the vegetable. Okay, put it on a plate next to the spaghetti and all bets are off. I actually came up with this idea watching my kids eat in a restaurant when they were 3 and 6 years old. And we were in a deli, and normally this deli will bring you a nice bowl of pickles, delicious, nice pickles, and put it on your table while you wait to order, because we can't, not be eating from the moment we walk in. But this one day, they were clearly out of pickles, and so what they brought was a bowl of sauerkraut, which I think, and I don't want to offend, it's in my heritage, but sauerkraut, that's a tough sell for a kid. Okay, let's just put it that way. Before I even could say, ew, sauerkraut, my kids had, with their fingers, taken it and gobbled down this whole bowl of sauerkraut with their fingers. Repulsive, bad manners, apologies. They're heathens, I'm not going to lie. But between the two of them, they ate all the sauerkraut. And I thought about that for years after it happened. Like, what on earth led them to eat that sauerkraut? Decade of thinking, and it finally struck me, oh, because it was there, and nothing else was. And that's it. That's literally it, right? If it's there and nothing else, if you're hungry and that's what's there, you're going to eat that thing. And we actually tested this with, with my University of Minnesota colleagues. We tested this in elementary school cafeterias, We just gave each student a little paper cup with some vegetable in it, and we gave it to them to eat before they went to lunch. So before they went into the cafeteria and got other food, before they filled their plates. Now, normally in this school, and I don't think this is unusual, but I guess I don't really know, but I don't think it's unusual, but normally in this school, only about 10% of kids would eat the vegetable on any given day. Okay, but with this strategy, 5 times as many kids ate the vegetable. Okay, so this graph is showing our broccoli version and our red pepper version, and the first bar in each of those is a normal day. The next 3 are veggies first days, and then the last one is a normal day again. And you can see in each case, veggies first completely multiplied the amount of kids who ate the vegetable, going from like under 50, and I think going from 42 to almost 250 kids eating the vegetable. So that's extremely effective strategy. And I also tried this out with the students in my freshman seminar, which is Psych of Eating. I had them try this for 3 weeks. I didn't say this is going to help you or not help you. I just said, eat your vegetable before you get the rest of your food. I didn't elaborate at all. And what we found is that not only did they eat more servings of vegetables, not too surprising, they also ate fewer calories overall, even though they weren't trying to reduce calories and didn't even really realize it. Okay, so what happens is eating more vegetables, they're filling. Okay, that often means eating less of something else, but you're not suffering and you're not forbidding yourself from that. So let's see, I could do one more strategy, but technically it says I have 1 minute till we start with questions. So do you want me to tell you one more strategy? And then, oh, wow, okay, woo, strategies. Okay, well, I hope this one doesn't disappoint you. Okay, so one last category of strategies. This is a different kind of strategy. This strategy has you make a point of eating with friends who have sensible eating habits, because they actually will rub off on you. And the way we studied this, and we actually had the most fun doing this study, We brought groups of 3 friends into the lab, under false pretenses, of course. And, we never tell anyone the truth. And we said, we want to see how you work together to solve a problem. And what we did was we sneakily watched whether they ate the fresh home-baked cookies that we made for them and served to them. But before we did that, we secretly got two of the three friends, into cahoots with us. We had secretly beforehand said to them, look, we're going to bring you cookies. They're going to look really good, and they're going to smell really good. Don't eat them. Do not eat them under any circumstance. So we told 2 of them that. Then when they're all 3 together, the third one doesn't know that anyone's been told anything. And all we did was look to see what this third one did. And what we found is that if the 2 friends didn't eat the cookies, neither did the third one. Okay, maybe not so exciting. But the important part is that later on, we separated them, put them in different rooms from each other to do other things, and brought them more cookies. Okay, and now, still, the third girl still didn't eat the cookies, even though her friends weren't even with her anymore, and they would never know if she had eaten them or not. Okay, so if you usually eat around people with healthy habits, not only will they probably rub off on you right then and there during that meal, but they'll probably last when they're gone. And if you think about it, you probably have friends who you kind of reliably, go pig out with, and friends who you reliably eat something healthy with. And if you just sort of, steer it, I mean, I'm not saying get rid of those friends, because I'm probably your friend that you pig out with, but but if you try to just sort of make an effort to focus more on the healthy eaters around you, it will be helpful. Okay, so I just want to sum up and say that the key to all these strategies and the other ones is that they'll work for you even though your willpower is not good enough. Okay, so doing these healthy things plus exercising, those things will improve your health. Okay, even if they don't make you thin, they will improve your health, and that's what matters. And so what I recommend is that you make these simple changes, and these are all simple changes, reach your leanest livable weight, and then just get on with it, right? Get back to living your life without food taking over, without worries about diet and weight and eating getting in the way of everything you need to be doing. Okay, I very much hope that you will feel liberated by this message and not discouraged. Okay, so the book, the first 3 words are diets don't work. It took me 10 years to get a book deal because of that. Diets don't work. The publisher said that's too depressing. It's not, and it's true that diets don't work, and I believe people want and deserve to know the truth. And, there's depressing books out there, right? The #1 bestseller when I was not getting a book deal because this was too depressing was He's Just Not That Into You. It's like super depressing news. So anyway, so it starts with these dreaded words, diets don't work, but it ends in a much better place. Okay, in fact, the last 3 words are what I think of are the most cheerful words possible. Okay, cup or cone. And that is how it ends. Okay, so thank you so much. And thank you, IdeaFestival. And I think we're going to take, awesome. I actually almost mentioned those cupcakes, because when I was talking about the donut.
You're welcome to come up. We're going to sit over
I could bring them around. I was actually thinking, God, there's donuts back there. I mean, there's cupcakes back there. Is that going to distract me for the entire talk?
So,
but I think it didn't. Oh, now I can see you all. Hello.
I know. They really smell good, too, don't they?
Do they?
Yeah, they really smell
They
good.
start.
I know, yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
I got nothing.
Okay, so before we start off, one of the big, Kentucky, unfortunately, is one of the unhealthiest states in the country. And a lot of it has to do, there's a lot of focus on a lot of different things, including lifestyle habits, but also eating, because we have we do have a lot of obesity. And there's a lot of strategies that people, we make movies and we have classes and those kinds of things. So
making movies is a strategy for weight loss?
They make little videos, but eat well and things like that.
I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Educating people on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what's your thoughts on when these kind of larger public-scale public health efforts that try to get people to alter their eating behaviors?
I mean, we haven't seen much success with those. So, I'm not opposed to teaching people about healthy eating, and people should know what's healthy, and So, I'm on board with that. But does that help people lose weight? There's no evidence for that whatsoever. So because of that, I kind of am more in favor of these kinds of solutions where you make these small changes that add up slowly. So an example of one of those, and I think these are a tough sell because they each are so little that people are like, who cares? That's one tiny thing. But if you do a lot of tiny things, it could add up. So one of them is that that law that they passed in New York, but then it never happened, where they could only sell soda in 16-ounce containers or smaller. And everyone made fun of it. I remember Jon Stewart made fun of it and said, all this is going to do is inconvenience people. It's like, yes, exactly. It's an obstacle. It will lead people to have less soda. It will. So I actually think those kinds of solutions that add up to working.
Yes,
but
sir.
Oh, hello. I'm Minoru Chow from DuPont Manual. And I was wondering about the experiment where your subjects had the same diet. What were the constants that you used? For example, did they start with the original same weight or were they different? Because it wouldn't say much if a 300-pound person lost 30 pounds while a 100-pound person lost,
Sure.
10.
Right. So most diet studies use BMI as their unit of measure, and that's a measure of weight that takes height into account. And I'm sure someone's going to say, that's horrible too. It's an imperfect way of doing things because it mixes up people who are fat and people who are very muscly. So it's not a perfect way, but those studies generally look at BMI. I think the one you're asking me about was one of the graphs of different things happening to people on the same diet. Yeah, so that's not my study. That's just the random diet study I found that actually presented its data that way. And they never present their data that way because diet studies try to make them look like they work when they present their data. So they would never do that. So I had to hunt to find one.
So you don't know the actual starting weight?
So I can't say I know the starting weights of the people in that very diagram. Okay, but the overall finding, I can say for certain that they have equated people, and what they're looking at is their percent change in weight.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that graph might even have been percent change.
It was
We can
pounds,
peek at it, but was it pounds? So,
I
okay.
think so.
Okay, so in general, you see this kind of data in terms of percent of starting weight that they've lost. Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's a very important point.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Corey May. I'm a computer science professor or student at Kentucky State University. Sorry, Dr. Hinman, I'm looking for your job. First of all, I want to say thank you for actually pursuing objective science in this field. It seems like it's really hard to find as you see more and more studies. Coca-Cola funding a thing saying, "Hey, you should have Coke. It's a healthy snack."
Right.
That's actually true. I know you'd mentioned that you thought it was effective that where New York had banned like large sodas, that it was an obstacle. Do you think that fast food restaurants specifically have a moral obligation to provide healthy avenues for their customers?
A moral obligation? Man, I mean, I would like them to do it. They're companies, they're free to do what they want, you know what I mean? So they certainly don't need to do anything. I think it would be lovely if they did. Every time you see fast food companies creating a healthy option, it's always terrible. Like if they could do it well, I think it would help their business. But until they can do it well, I don't think it's going to help them. I don't actually know the numbers on how well these salads sell, but they're always terrible. God.
Yes, sir.
So.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Chris. I'm a local educator and also a student. Most of my students teach me stuff every day. But I am curious, are you familiar with Nicole Avina's book, Why Diets Fail?
No.
Okay, so
someone else.
She might have had difficulty having hers published as well. I think it came out after yours. But
okay.
she actually helped create one of the videos you were discussing, Chris. The educational videos on TED Ed about why sugar levels affect dopamine in our brains and how actually biologically we look for diversity in our diet, but sugar increases dopamine levels, and it doesn't actually go down after more and more sugar like other foods do. And so I'm curious, what are your feelings about how food has changed, especially with most of our produce food, and how sugar has been the biggest supplement that's replaced fat in terms of what we tried to do in the 1970s and 80s. And going back to moral obligations, do you feel like that's a concern and ramifications of our diet from that?
Okay, lots of questions in there. So
Sorry.
sugar.
I always have more questions than answers. I apologize.
Yeah, me too. I'm right there with you. So sugar seems to be enemy number one right now. That seems to be the accepted view, right, about sugar. And there's lots of evidence about the many, many things that are bad about sugar. And I get it. I'm on board. I know it. I still can't fully recommend that people try to cut out all sugar. It's hard. Sugar, everyone, you are born liking sugar. It's innate. It's in us. So I can't get on board a plan of no sugar, lose all sugar. I mean, if you want to, that's fine. But if that sounds like a living hell to you, then just try to do like a moderation thing with sugar. I don't think I'm kind of getting at all the things you asked for, but I wanted to point out this other thing, which is one thing I learned at this meeting this summer, I alluded to that meeting, is that what it's looking like, and I know our government's very concerned about this, is that all the sugar substitutes are just as bad as sugar. So all the fake sugars. So they're really interested now in trying to find people to do research on getting people to not use sugar or fake sugar at all. And in fact, we're starting a study like this, where we're trying to help people reduce all the sugar that they use in their coffee. Because think about it, some people are having like 3 or 4 coffees a day, a couple tablespoons of sugar, or teaspoon of sugar in each. If you can cut that out, you can cut like a decent amount of sugar. So we're trying to see if we can, who knows if we'll be able to do it, but we're trying to do that.
Yes, sir.
I can't even remember what else you asked. I apologize.
That's funny.
Maybe
Yes, sir.
discuss it later. Sorry.
I'm Eric, and I'm from Atherton High School, and I'm currently mesmerized by the fact that this microphone is almost as tall as I am. But
Wow.
this is mostly going to be in reference to my sister. She is considering a tummy tuck and like plastic surgery,
Wow.
just because of kind of like the genetic thing that you were talking about. She feels like she's never going to be thin, and I've kind of sort of been trying to talk her out of that. I don't know if that necessarily makes me a jerk, but so how would you recommend I go about like talking with her about getting a tummy tuck? Or do you even think plastic surgery is something that's like good? Does it even like, I don't know the statistics, but does it help people keep up weight? I doubt, but does it? Like just kind of weigh in on plastic surgery.
Yeah. So I really believe quite strongly that what we need to do is learn to accept people of all different sizes and weights, and that, thank you, and that goes for other people and ourselves. So we need to learn to accept ourselves at all sizes and weights, and other people as well. And that's a tough road, I know. There's so much pressure around us. We are completely swimming in a sea of pressure to look a certain way, and the way we're supposed to look is extremely unattainable for most people. And there is really horrible stigma against obese people. So I really put as sort of thing number one on the to-do list in terms of what we need to do and where our moral obligation lies is to start to do things to get rid of weight stigma. You know, people are being denied jobs and educations just because of the size. And it's absolutely outrageous, and it is completely legal. There's no legislation anywhere saying that you can't just deny someone a job because they're obese. So I think that's like thing number one, is we got to deal with that.
I hate to cut you off.
And also, and also promote acceptance. So 2 things: reduce obesity stigma, promote body acceptance at all.
We have time for one more question. Sorry, but
we can chat more
Traci
later.
will be out signing her book afterward.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I feel like I'm not satisfying you with my answers. I'm so sorry.
All right, my name is Sloan, and I'm a student at the University of Kentucky, and I just kind of wanted to go back to what you were talking about with trying not to forbid foods in your diet. And my question was more on, what if you have certain diet restrictions, like, you know, say I have lactose intolerance, but my favorite food is ice cream.
Oh, no.
So kind of, you know, what to do with that kind of situation.
Yeah, so of course, if you have a medical reason to not eat a food, then yes, obey that. I'm definitely not saying to eat the foods that you're medically, unable to eat. So yes, in that circumstance, you have to do it, and it's hard. It's not any easier because you have to. This is my sense of it, right?
Yeah.
And so you just have to struggle with that. Are you asking for like
Permission?
I mean, yeah. I can't give permission. I mean, I feel like these same strategies should work. You want to never be in a situation where you have to resist something. So basically, you can never be in a situation where you have to resist something that's in front of you. That is doomed, right? People are horrible at that. So don't put yourself in that kind of situation. I can give you strategies for that. But the other thing, since it's lactose, you know what's good? Because I couldn't have any milk products after my firstborn was born. And I love ice cream as well. Coconut sorbet. I don't like sorbet. Sorbet is bullshit. But coconut, isn't it? Sorry. Apologies. Total sorry. But coconut.
That's in the book, too.
That I don't like sorbet is in the book. The swearing pops. I'm so sorry. Coconut sorbet is not like the other kinds. It's like creamy, like ice cream. It's the best like masquerader as ice cream. I'm sorry. It's true. Try it. I'm not in their pocket.
Good.
I don't even know who they are.
You don't own any
Who
coconut
makes
companies.
coconut ice cream? Yeah, I don't know.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.